Hello everyone, and welcome to the basic networking tutorial for Unity. If you don't have Unity, you can go to unity3d.com/get-unity/download and download Unity. I already have Unity downloaded and installed, so let's get started by creating a new project. Okay, so here you're able to assign a name to your project, and I'm going to simply call this the Unity Networking Tutorial Project, and you can also select a location for where your project will be stored on your computer. Also, make sure that 3D is highlighted down here, as we will be creating a 3D project. It's going to import just some basic things, and then you should get something like this. If you don't have Unity Pro, it may look just, the colors may be different. The very first thing that we are going to do is create a scenes folder, and we can do that by going over here, going to create folder, and we're going to call it scenes. Now, as you know, in most multiplayer games there's a lobby scene where you can choose a server, and then the actual map scene that holds, all of your models and where your players fight against each other. Right now we're going to create the offline scene, or the lobby. So let's go ahead and save this scene in our newly created scenes folder, and we're just going to call it lobby. We're also going to go up here and create a empty game object, and we're going to call it the network manager. Then we're going to add a network manager component and a network manager HUD. Now, one reason why I wanted to go ahead and create the lobby or offline scene is we're going to need to fill in a few things within the network manager component. The three main things we're going to worry about right now is the offline scene, the online scene, and the player prefab. Now, for a scene to be put into the offline or online slot, we are going to have to add it to the build settings. So let's find our scene file and just drag that in there. And there's nothing else to do, just exit out of that for now. Now we can take this lobby file or asset and drag it over here to the offline scene. So now that that's done, we can go on to a more exciting scene, our map. Let's go ahead and save this scene as we did with the lobby. Just call it map or whatever you want to. And we're going to need a player, something for you to control, something for you to move around. And Unity comes with some standard assets that we can import by going up here to Assets, Import Package, and we're going to import the Characters package. And as you can see, it gives you a lot of scripts and textures and assets and models. We're going to import all of that, and it may take some time depending on your computer. Usually it seems to take longer on textures. It may have to do something to them, crunch them, which we may get into in a later, more advanced chapter. Whenever we're working on actually making our scenes look good, and whenever you have to worry about texture size. But for now, let's just get some basic networking done. So we have our standard assets. Let's go down in the folders until we find the first person character. And we are going to want the FPS controller prefab. And we're just going to drag that right on up here into our hierarchy. And this prefab already has pretty much everything that we need to walk around. But if we look at the scene, you can see there's nothing to walk around on. So let's fix that. We're just going to add a simple plane, and we're going to zero this out, and we're going to make it big. Later on we'll look into adding a terrain where we can deform it and make it look cool, but for now let's just create a basic plane. And this is kind of blinding, so let's create a new folder of materials. Let's go into that folder and create a new material. We're just going to call this one green. And go over here to green, sort of a dark green, and just drag that material right onto that plane in the scene. Now it's not so white. Okay, so let's check out our controller. Oh, it's way over there. So let's go ahead and zero that out too. Okay, if we zero it out, we notice that's kind of sticking below the plane, which isn't good. If we started up the game right now, well, it would actually work. But sometimes you might fall through if you're stuck inside an object. You might just go on through it, and usually that's what happens. But since I'm recording, they must have fixed something, or I don't know. But one thing that we can see is in here in the console we have a warning, or not really a warning, but it says there's 2 audio listeners in the scene, and Unity only wants 1 audio listener. The audio listener is pretty much your ears. You only have 1 set of ears. You can't have 2 sets in 2 different places. So if we look at our main camera, we can see an audio listener. And if we look at the first person character, we can see that it also has a camera and an audio listener. Now for our game, we only need 1 camera and definitely only 1 audio listener. So we can get rid of this main camera up here. Now, if we go in, no warnings, move around, and can't really tell that we're moving around on this shiny green plane, so let's add just a cube. Let's bring it over here, kind of move it around, just so that we have some objects for reference. And you can duplicate objects that you've already created, like this cube, just by selecting it and hitting Control D on Windows. Okay, so yeah, that looks better. Okay. So now that we have our player pretty much ready to go for a single player game, we now need to turn it into a player that will work for a networked game. And it's actually pretty simple. We need to add a network identity to the player object, and since it will be controlled by the local player, we're just going to check local player authority. Now we also will want our player to be seen by other players moving around, and we can accomplish that by adding a network transform component. And we are going to want to set the sync mode to sync transform. You can play around with the others, like if you're using a rigid body or even the character controller, but for now we're just going to sync the transform. Okay, so we have our two networking components. Let's go ahead and click apply up arrow, which pretty much saves the prefab. But we're going to want our own prefab for later on. So let's go ahead and create a prefabs folder. And we're just going to drag that little dude down here. And we're just going to call it player. Make sure that it saved our components. So we should be good to go. Now we can delete our player from our map scene because we don't want it to be spawned in if you're not connected to a server. We're going to want the server to spawn our player in. So let's go ahead and delete that. We're going to go ahead and save the map scene. And we're going to go back to our lobby scene. As I mentioned earlier, there's 3 main slots to look at on the network manager. And now that we have our player prefab, we can just drag him right into the player prefab slot. And let's go ahead and test it out. Let's see what happens. One thing that we do need to do is, as you can see, whenever I dragged the map scene over to the online scene, it didn't take. We also need to add it to the build settings. So we've added our offline scene, our online scene, and our player object. That is good to go. Let's go ahead and let's see what happens whenever we play. Let's go to a LAN host. And look here. We can run around, jump, and most importantly, we didn't get any errors. Okay, so let's see what happens whenever we add 2 players. So we're going to need to run 2 copies of the game, and we can do this by just building a version of the game. We can do that in build settings. Then click build and run. And I like to put all of my builds into the builds folder, so I'm going to create that folder. And I'm just going to call this tutorial. And it's going to take a few seconds to build all of the assets and such. Even though we don't have very many, it still has to build the player for us. Alrighty, that didn't take too long at all. So, since I want the editor to be the server, I'm going to start it up first. And I'm going to click LAN host. And if you look around, you don't see my cursor anywhere. That's because the first person controller takes control of your cursor and actually keeps it in the center of the game scene. To get your cursor back, hit escape. Okay. That actually launched in full screen mode, which I did not want. So let's go ahead and build and run again. And it's going to be much faster this time, since it's already built once. And I'm going to click the windowed option. So let's go back in our editor, start up the host real quick. And on the window that we have open, we are going to join as a client. We can notice some problems right off the bat here. If we look over here in the console, we have that little error about 2 audio listeners again. And you don't see the other player. You also hear, if you listen, 2 sets of footstep sounds. What's happening here is if we look at the player, both of these player objects over here in the hierarchy that were spawned by the server, both of these have the character controller, or the first person character controller script enabled, which is the script that controls your player's movement. So whenever it spawned the remote player in, your client's actually trying to move that one too. Another issue is if we look at the child object, the first person characters, they both have cameras enabled in that audio listener. To fix this issue, we are going to need a script. So let's create a new folder in the assets folder called scripts, and we're just going to create a player script. Let's open up that player script by double clicking on it. Now if you're new to Unity, it's going to open up into mono-develop. I personally like Visual Studio better than mono-develop. The choice is up to you. The code's going to be the same, and it's going to work exactly the same way. I just like the Visual Studio interface a little bit better. Let me increase this font a little bit. There we go. Okay, so all that we're going to need for our player script right now is the start function. And start is automatically called by Unity whenever any object that has this player script or component. Scripts are called components, if you didn't already know. Any of them that have this player component attached to it, this start function is going to be called on that game object. One of the first things that we're going to need to do is use the Unity engine networking library, or namespace. I forgot what those are called. But anyways, and this will also be a network behavior instead of a mono behavior. A network behavior gives us some extra variables and functions related to Unity's built-in networking. So as I mentioned earlier, whenever 2 players are spawned, all of these components in this child component is all enabled, and each client or player is trying to move the other player. We can fix this in script by disabling, or actually I think it would be better to just enable the components for the local player. Okay, so let's go through each of these components. A remote player is not going to need a character controller or first person controller. It will need an audio source because that's that component sends sounds out, and we want to be able to hear other players' sounds like footsteps and any other audio that game object might produce. Those are fine. Let's look at this sub-object, the first person character. It will not need a camera, and it will not need the audio listener. So really only the local player will need this entire child object. So we can just disable the entire game object, which disables all of that too. So let's go ahead and bring this into the scene and take a look. Okay, so whenever it's instantiated, we can see that everything is disabled that we want to be. That's deactivated. So it should be good to go. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's attach our player component to it. And now let's actually do some scripting so that if this game object is a local player, we can go ahead and enable these components that's needed for the local player to control the character. And it's some pretty simple scripting. Get component, and we're going to want the character controller, and we are going to want to set that to enable. What did I do wrong? Let's get the first person controller, and we're going to have to go into Unity standard assets, characters, first person controller, and set this to enabled too. And then we're going to want to activate that sub-object down here. And we're going to do that by its name. And we can simply do that by using transform.find. And then we're just going to paste in that name. And access the game object. And set active to true. Okay, so we have the character controller, we have the first person controller. Excellent. One other thing that I would want to do, let's see. Okay, let's go ahead and save that and delete this from our lobby scene. Let's go back to our map scene and just test something out real quick. Let's bring the player in. And whenever we click play, there's not going to be we're going to have to enable this. And let's look in scene view. Okay, so this is sort of what other players are going to see. And right now they can't see anything. You know, they won't be able to see these icons or anything because they don't have the editor. You know, it's pretty much empty. So let's fix that real quick by going up here and creating a capsule, and let's drag that or parent it to the player. And we're just going to call this the body. Then we're going to 0 it out. And now whenever we click play and enable the player, we're going to see that capsule. And one thing we can do is we won't need the capsule collider because the character controller over here has its own capsule collider attached to it, or it's built in. So let's save this prefab. Remember, you can either do it by clicking apply or just dragging it down here. And now we can delete this from the game scene. And let's go back to our lobby scene. And let's save. Make sure everything's still set up. Let's go ahead and build and run. Okay, we have it windowed. Let's play. We're going to host it in the editor. And if you get this far and you're having trouble seeing the mouse cursor, hit escape and you'll get your mouse cursor back. Let's do line client. And something is not right. As we can see, this is not normal. Let's see what's going on over here. Oh, okay. We added this network, or we inherited from the network behavior so that we could have access to some networking related variables that we actually need. And what we need to do is to actually wrap this code into an if statement. And we only want to activate it if is local player. Okay, let's save that out. Let's wait for it to compile. And then we can build and run. And hopefully now, oh, we still had the game open. It's not good. It's not gonna work. Okay, let's go and start that up. Oh, not sure if that's actually gonna work. No, we're still having the same problem. Let's see. I think it's because it didn't actually compile before I built. So let's go ahead and build and run again. Let's do land host. Okay, we're still having issues here. So let's see what's going on again. Okay, so it's still enabling So we did save it. This is local player. Let's look over here to the prefabs. Oh, we didn't initially disable the components. So let's disable the character controller, the first person controller. And let's go down here to this sub-object, first person character, and disable, and let's just disable the entire game object. So if you disable a game object, then all of the components attached to it will be disabled as well. But once you set it to active, all of them will be in their initial state. So if these are enabled while this is disabled, once you enable it, those are going to be enabled as well. But if you have the game object disabled and those disabled, and you only turn on the game object, those will remain disabled until you activate them in the code. But let's leave those activated. Let's leave the game object deactivated. And let's save. And let's build and run, hopefully. Hopefully those issues are fixed. And we still have the game open. We're not off to a good start, are we? It's about like what happened last time. I have a feeling this will work, but I could be completely wrong. Okay, let's start as a host. And let's start as a client. Okay, looking good so far. Oh yeah, I think we finally fixed the issue. Let's move that window over a little bit. There we go. We can now see remote players moving around. And let's head back over. Yeah. Pretty cool. We now have a basic network game with player movement in it. And it would have been a lot quicker if I hadn't made that little mistake of deactivating the components to begin with. So hopefully in the next tutorial we'll be covering how to smooth that movement out. As you probably saw, it was a little choppy, but there's a few things we can do to smooth that out. And later on, I plan for this to be a full series. If you haven't noticed, this is just one of my first few videos, so it's sort of a learning experience to me too, but I've been using Unity for the last probably 3 or 4 years, and I thought I'd give something back to the community since, you know, for me, I've gotten so much out of Unity and the community. You know, if you're new to Unity, make sure you check out the forums. You can also check out the Unity Answers site. Tons of great information. And hopefully this tutorial series will also become part of that great set of information available to you. So I will see you later.